We took in my niece after my sister abandoned her. Then she came back and demanded her property back. 2 years ago, my wife and I took in my niece Emily. My sister, her mother, was a mess, jumping from one relationship to another, barely holding down a job, and completely incapable of raising a child. One day, she showed up at our door, shoved Emily's bags into our hands, and said, "I just need a little time to get my life together." That little time turned into 2 years. We raised Emily like our own. We put her in school, gave her stability, gave her love. She finally had a real home. Then, out of nowhere, my sister came back. "I'm ready to take her now," she said casually, like she was picking up a package she had left behind. But Emily, she didn't want to go. She cried, clung to us, begged us not to send her back. And when we told my sister no, she lost it. "She's mine! You don't have the right to keep her." She thought she could just walk back into her daughter's life like nothing happened. But if she thought we were just going to hand Emily over, she was in for a rude awakening. Before we jump into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed the channel is losing some traction, and subscribing is one of the best ways you can support us. It's quick, free, and it helps us keep bringing you awesome content. Your support means the world. Let's keep this channel growing together. Thanks so much. Now let's start the video. When my sister dropped Emily off at our doorstep 2 years ago, she didn't even pretend to care. She didn't ask about school, didn't cry, didn't hug her daughter goodbye. She just dumped her bags in our hallway, looked me in the eye, and said, "I just need a little time to figure things out. It won't be long." And then she disappeared. At first we thought maybe she was telling the truth. Maybe she'd get her act together and come back in a few weeks, ready to be the mother Emily deserved. But those weeks turned into months, and those months turned into years. During that time, Emily became our daughter in every way that mattered. We enrolled her in school, we helped her with her homework, we took her to the doctor, celebrated her birthdays, comforted her when she had nightmares. We loved her. And for the first time in her life, she had stability. Then, just as suddenly as she had left, my sister came back. She showed up at our house one evening, standing on our porch like a stranger. When we opened the door, she smiled like nothing had happened. "I'm ready to take Emily now," she said, holding out her arms like she was expecting her daughter to run into them. But Emily, she hid behind me. She clutched my shirt, her small hands shaking, and whispered, "I don't want to go." And that's when I knew. We weren't going to let this happen. If my sister thought she could just walk back into Emily's life, take her like she was some forgotten object, and erase everything we had built, she was about to learn just how wrong she was. My sister stood there, arms crossed, expecting us to just hand Emily over like she was some lost possession finally being reclaimed. She wasn't apologetic. She wasn't remorseful. She just assumed she could walk back in and take control. I didn't move, neither did my wife. Emily clung to my shirt, her fingers trembling, her breath uneven. She was terrified. She knew exactly what going back to her mother meant: chaos, neglect, instability. "No," I said firmly. My sister's smile vanished instantly. "What do you mean, no?" she snapped, as if the thought of being denied had never even crossed her mind. I folded my arms. "You left her here for 2 years. No calls, no visits, no financial help. You didn't even check in, and now you think you can just waltz back in and take her?" She rolled her eyes, scoffing. "I needed time to get my life together. You don't understand how hard it's been for me." I let out a bitter laugh. "Hard for you? Do you know how hard it was for Emily? She spent months crying herself to sleep, wondering why her own mother didn't want her. She was afraid to get too comfortable because she thought you'd come back at any moment to take her away from the only stability she's ever had. And now that she's finally happy, finally thriving, you expect us to just hand her over like none of that happened?" She threw her hands up in frustration. "She's my daughter!" I turned to Emily, crouching down so I could look her in the eyes. "Sweetheart, do you want to go with your mom?" She shook her head violently, tears streaming down her face. "No, please don't make me go." I stood back up and looked my sister straight in the eye. "She doesn't want to go. That should tell you everything." My sister's face twisted with anger. "You're poisoning her against me." "No, you did that yourself." She lost it. She started screaming about how we were stealing her child, how we had no right to keep her, how we were just trying to make her look bad. My wife grabbed Emily and held her close, whispering reassurances in her ear, while my sister ranted and raged like a storm. I waited until she was out of breath before speaking again. You abandoned her. You don't get to play the victim now. If you want to be in her life, you need to prove you can be a stable parent. Until then, we're done here. I shut the door in her face. She banged on it for a few minutes, shouting every insult she could think of, but I didn't open it. Eventually, she left. And when I turned back to Emily, she was still clutching my wife, her face buried in her chest. I don't want to go with her, she whispered. You won't, I promised. Because no matter what happened next, we weren't going to let her go without a fight. The next few days were tense. My sister didn't call, didn't text, but we knew this wasn't over. She wasn't the type to let something go quietly. My wife and I tried to keep things normal for Emily, but she wasn't stupid. She could feel the tension, and every time the phone rang or there was a knock at the door, she flinched. Then, just when we thought she had given up, my sister showed up again. This time, she wasn't alone. She brought a lawyer. We opened the door to find her standing there, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. Beside her was a middle-aged man in a cheap suit, holding a folder under his arm. I'm giving you one last chance to do the right thing, she said, her voice dripping with fake patience. Give me my daughter back, and we don't have to make this ugly. I folded my arms. Go ahead, make it ugly. Her expression hardened. I've spoken to a lawyer, and I have every legal right to take my child back. If you refuse, I'll take you to court, and trust me, you won't win. I felt my jaw clench, but I refused to let her see me break. Oh, so now you suddenly care about legal rights, I shot back. Where was that concern when you abandoned her for 2 years? The lawyer cleared his throat, stepping forward. Mr. Last name, I understand this is an emotional situation, but your sister is Emily's biological mother. Unless there are extreme circumstances, the courts will almost always side with the parent. I let out a bitter laugh. Oh, don't worry. I'm well aware of how the system works. But let me ask you something, counselor. How many cases have you worked where a mother disappears for 2 years without a single call and then expects to waltz back in like nothing happened? He hesitated. My sister scoffed. I was getting my life together. You have no idea what I've been through. And you have no idea what Emily's been through, I snapped. Do you know what it was like to watch her cry herself to sleep for months, wondering why her own mother didn't want her? Do you know what it was like to hold her while she begged us not to make her go back to you? You don't get to just show up now and pretend to be a mother because it's convenient for you. She opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, Emily came to the door. She had been listening. Her eyes were wide with fear, but her hands were clenched into fists. She looked at her mother, the woman who had left her behind, and for the first time, she spoke up for herself. I don't want to go with you, she said, her voice shaking but firm. I want to stay here. My sister's smug expression disappeared in an instant. Sweetheart, you don't mean that, she said, trying to reach for her. Emily stepped back. Yes, I do. My wife bent down and wrapped an arm around Emily's shoulders, whispering, It's okay. You're safe. I turned back to my sister, my voice steady. If you think we're handing her over, you're out of your mind. If you want to go to court, fine. But you're going to have to explain to a judge why you abandoned your daughter for 2 years. You're going to have to answer for every missed birthday, every ignored phone call, every moment she spent thinking you didn't love her. And I guarantee you they won't see you as the fit mother you think you are. The lawyer shifted uncomfortably. Even he knew this wasn't going to be an easy case for her. My sister's face twisted with rage. This isn't over, she hissed. No, it's not, I agreed, because we're not letting you take her without a fight. She stormed off, her lawyer trailing behind her. As soon as they were gone, Emily turned to me, her eyes filled with fear. She's not going to take me, is she? She whispered. I crouched down so we were eye level, resting a hand on her shoulder. Not if I have anything to say about it. Because this wasn't just about legal rights anymore. This was about fighting for the little girl who had already lost too much. The next few days were filled with tension and uncertainty. My sister hadn't returned, but we knew this wasn't over. The lawyer's involvement meant she was serious about taking Emily back. And if she really took this to court, we had no idea how it would play out. The legal system tends to favor biological parents, even when they don't deserve it. And my sister, she was counting on that. But she didn't expect us to fight back. My wife and I wasted no time. We reached out to a lawyer of our own, gathering every piece of evidence we could. Every missed birthday, every ignored call, every school meeting and doctor's appointment we attended in her absence. We had receipts, photos, testimonies from teachers, neighbors, and even friends who had watched us raise Emily while her mother was nowhere to be found. Then, just when we were preparing for the worst, my sister made her next move. She didn't take it to court. Instead, she showed up at our house again, this time with 2 police officers. When I opened the door and saw her standing there, arms crossed, looking smug, my stomach sank. One of the officers cleared his throat. "Sir, we received a report that you're unlawfully keeping a minor from her biological mother." My jaw clenched. "I'm not keeping anyone," I said evenly. "Emily doesn't want to go with her." My sister's fake concern was almost laughable. "She's my child," she said dramatically, looking at the officers like she was some kind of victim. "They won't let me see her. They turned her against me." One of the officers frowned, clearly trying to assess the situation. "Sir, can we speak to Emily?" I stepped aside, and Emily peeked out from behind my wife, her face pale with fear. "Emily, sweetheart," my sister cooed, fake warmth dripping from her voice. "Come here, baby. Let's go home." But Emily shook her head violently. "No, I don't want to go with you." The officers exchanged glances. One of them crouched down to Emily's level and softened his tone. "Sweetheart, we just need to know what you want. No one can make you do anything. Do you want to go with your mom?" She clung to my wife and burst into tears. "No, I don't want to go. Please don't make me." The second officer sighed and turned to my sister. "Ma'am, if your daughter is saying she doesn't want to go with you, we can't force her. This isn't a criminal matter. It's a civil one. If you want custody, you need to take it up in family court." My sister's face twisted with rage. "Are you kidding me? I'm her mother. They brainwashed her." But the officers were done. "Ma'am, unless you have a court order, you need to leave. This is not how you handle custody disputes." She turned to me, her face red with fury. "You're going to regret this," she hissed. "I'm taking her back, one way or another." Then she stormed off. The officers gave me a nod before leaving, and as soon as the door shut, Emily collapsed into my wife's arms, sobbing. "She's not going to take me, is she?" she whispered. I rested a hand on her shoulder. "Not if I have anything to say about it." Because if my sister thought this was over, she had no idea how far we were willing to go to protect the little girl we loved. The night after my sister showed up with the police, my wife and I sat in the living room, feeling the weight of everything pressing down on us. Emily had finally fallen asleep after hours of crying, terrified that she'd wake up and be taken away. My wife ran her hands through her hair, exhausted. "She's not going to stop," she said quietly. "She's going to keep coming back, trying to take Emily from us." I nodded. "Then we have to make sure she can't." The next morning, I called our lawyer and told him we were ready to fight. If my sister wanted to drag us into court, fine. But we were going to make sure we were ready. We gathered everything: messages, school records, doctor's visits, statements from teachers and neighbors. Every time my sister had ignored Emily, every moment she had chosen anything but being a mother, we documented it. Then, a few days later, we got the papers. My sister had officially filed for full custody. She was really doing it. She had no stable job, no home of her own, no history of responsible parenting, but she still thought she could take Emily from us. I read through the paperwork, my blood boiling. My sister had lied about everything. In her statement, she claimed she had always been in contact, that she had tried to visit multiple times, but we refused to let her see Emily. She even said she had been sending money for Emily's care, a complete lie. I clenched my fists. She thought she could twist the story to make herself look like a victim. But what she didn't realize, we were prepared. The court date was set, and when the day finally arrived, we walked into that courtroom ready to fight for Emily. My sister sat across from us, wearing a smug expression like she had already won. But as soon as our lawyers started presenting the evidence, the records, the statements, the cold, hard facts, that smugness vanished. The judge turned to my sister, frowning. "Ms. Sister's last name, can you explain why there is no record of you attempting to contact your daughter for 2 years?" My sister stammered. I was getting my life together. I didn't want to come back into her life until I was stable." The judge raised an eyebrow. "And yet you believe that, after 2 years of absence, You should have the right to uproot her from the only stable home she's ever known. My sister had nothing to say. Then it was our turn. We spoke about how we had raised Emily as our own, about how she had finally found stability, about how she had begged us not to send her back. And when the judge asked Emily directly who she wanted to stay with, she didn't hesitate. "I want to stay with my aunt and uncle," she said, her voice shaking. "They love me. They take care of me. I don't want to go with her." My sister looked like she had been slapped. The judge exhaled, flipping through the paperwork one last time before looking up. "I don't see a scenario where uprooting Emily from her current home would be in her best interest. Custody will remain with Mr. and Mrs., our last name, Ms., sister's last name. If you wish to pursue visitation rights in the future, you will need to demonstrate significant improvements in your stability and involvement." And just like that, it was over. Emily was safe. As we left the courtroom, my sister stormed past us, her face red with rage. "This isn't fair," she spat. "She's my daughter." I turned to her, my voice calm but firm. "Then you should have acted like it when it mattered." She opened her mouth to argue, but then just stormed out. I turned to Emily, who was still holding my wife's hand, looking scared but relieved. I crouched down to her level and smiled. "You're staying with us, sweetheart. No one is taking you away." And for the first time in weeks, she smiled back. The car ride home from the courthouse was silent. Not because there was tension, but because all three of us, my wife, Emily, and I, were finally processing what had just happened. It was over. Emily sat in the back seat, staring out the window. Every now and then, she'd glance at me in the rearview mirror, almost like she was checking to make sure this was real, that we weren't about to turn the car around and drop her off at her mother's house. "You okay, sweetheart?" my wife asked gently. Emily took a deep breath and nodded. "Yeah, I was scared the judge would make me go with her." I gripped the steering wheel a little tighter. So were we, but the truth won out. She was quiet for a moment before whispering, "Thank you for fighting for me." I swallowed hard, feeling my throat tighten. I reached back and squeezed her hand. "We always will." That night, we celebrated in the simplest way, just the three of us at home, having dinner like any other night. No big party, no grand gestures, just peace. Emily ate her food without looking over her shoulder. She laughed at a joke my wife made. She leaned into me when I tucked her in for bed. She was finally safe. But my sister, she wasn't done yet. The next morning, I woke up to a string of texts from random numbers. "You had no right to take her from her real mother. Blood is blood. You'll never replace her. You're disgusting for turning a child against her own mom." And then, a long message from my sister herself. "You think you won? You think you're so much better than me? You poisoned Emily against me. You stole my daughter. One day she'll realize what you did, and when that day comes, you'll regret everything." I stared at my phone, my anger boiling. After everything, she still refused to admit that this was her own fault. She still thought she was the victim, still thought she was entitled to Emily's love just because she gave birth to her. I put my phone down and took a deep breath. She wasn't worth a response. Instead, I walked into the kitchen, where my wife and Emily were making breakfast. Emily was standing on a stool, carefully pouring pancake batter onto the pan, my wife smiling beside her. A real family. A safe, happy, stable home. My sister's words, they meant nothing. Because at the end of the day, Emily had chosen us. And no matter what my sister said, that was never going to change. The days after the court ruling were quiet. Too quiet. My sister hadn't shown up, hadn't called, hadn't tried to barge back into Emily's life. And that made me nervous. People like her don't just walk away. They fume, they plot, they wait for the right moment to strike again. And I wasn't about to let my guard down, but surprisingly, the storm never came. Instead, over the next few weeks, something else started to happen. Emily changed. At first, it was subtle. She started sleeping through the night more often, no longer waking up from nightmares of being dragged away. She started smiling more, relaxing, trusting that she wasn't going anywhere. The fear that had been woven into her every movement, it started to fade. One evening, we were sitting on the couch watching a movie when she suddenly turned to me. "I want to change my last name." I blinked, taken aback. "What?" She hesitated for a second, then said it again, more confidently. I don't want her last name anymore. I want to have yours. My wife and I exchanged a glance. This was huge. Are you sure, sweetheart? My wife asked carefully. Emily nodded. She didn't want me. She only wanted control. But you guys, you're my real parents. You never left me. I swallowed hard, forcing down the emotion rising in my throat. Emily, that means the world to us. So, can we do it? She asked, eyes full of hope. Of course, I said, without hesitation. If that's what you want, we'll make it happen. That night, as I lay in bed, I thought about everything that had led up to this moment. The fear, the fights, the betrayal. My sister had tried to force her way back into Emily's life, convinced that biology alone made her a mother. But real motherhood, real family, it was about love, sacrifice, showing up every single day, no matter what. Emily had made her choice, and nothing my sister did was ever going to change that. The process of legally changing Emily's last name took time, but the moment we filed the paperwork, something in her shifted. It was like she finally had full control over her own life, like she was no longer tied to the woman who had abandoned her. Every time she practiced writing her new last name, her smile grew wider. It was a reminder that she belonged here, with us. For the first time in years, she felt safe. But then, my sister found out. It didn't take long. Someone in the family must have told her, because within a few days, I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. You have no right to take my name away from my daughter. No greeting, no pretense, just pure entitlement. I ignored it. The next day, more messages. You're turning her against me. One day she'll see the truth. You're trying to erase me, but she'll always be mine. You're disgusting. I could feel the rage boiling beneath her words, but I didn't respond. She had no power here anymore. Then, 2 days later, she sent one final message. She may have your name now, but she'll never really be yours. One day, she'll come back to me. I stared at my phone for a long time before setting it down. My wife noticed my expression and reached for my hand. She's desperate, she said softly. I nodded. And she's losing. Emily wasn't hers anymore. She never really had been. She had only ever belonged to the people who truly loved her. And my sister? She was finally realizing she had lost. After my sister's last message, I expected more. More threats, more manipulative guilt trips, more attempts to force her way back into Emily's life. But instead, silence. Days passed, then weeks. No calls, no texts, no surprise visits at our doorstep. It was almost eerie, like she had finally realized she had lost, like she had finally accepted that Emily was no longer hers. But just because my sister had stopped reaching out didn't mean Emily had stopped feeling the weight of it. One night, as I was finishing up some work in my office, I heard a soft knock on the door. Dad? Emily's voice was small, hesitant. I turned to her and smiled. What's up, sweetheart? She lingered in the doorway, playing with the hem of her sleeve. Can I ask you something? I put my laptop aside. Always. She walked in, sitting across from me, her hands folded in her lap. Do you think she ever really loved me? The question hit me like a truck. I had spent so much time focusing on keeping Emily safe, on making sure my sister never got the chance to hurt her again, that I hadn't really stopped to think about how deep that hurt actually ran. I took a slow breath. I think she loved you the only way she knew how. But love isn't just about saying the words, Emily. It's about showing up. It's about choosing someone every single day, and she never did that for you. Emily nodded slowly, her eyes glistening. Yeah, that's what I thought. She looked down at her hands, picking at her nails, before whispering, I'm glad she's gone, but sometimes I still miss having a mom. My chest tightened. I reached for her hand, giving it a squeeze. You will always have a mom. She just looks a little different than you expected. Emily blinked at me, confused, and then, right on cue, my wife walked in, holding a cup of tea. Everything okay? She asked, looking between us. I turned back to Emily. That's your mom, I said gently. She's the one who tucks you in at night, the one who makes your favorite breakfast when you have a bad day, the one who loves you without conditions. That's what a real mother is. Emily's eyes filled with tears. I love you, Mom, she whispered. My wife's breath hitched, and in an instant Emily was in her arms. And at that moment, I knew my sister had never really stood a chance. Emily had made her choice, and we were never letting her go. In the weeks that followed, something in Emily changed. The fear that had once clouded her eyes slowly disappeared. She no longer jumped when the phone rang, no longer asked if my sister was going to come back and try to take her away. She was finally settling into her life without the weight of uncertainty. One evening, as we were setting the table for dinner, she casually mentioned something that stopped me in my tracks. "I had a dream last night," she said, placing forks next to the plates. "Mom was in it." I hesitated before responding. "What kind of dream?" She shrugged. "She was trying to take me away again. She kept saying she was my real mom and that I belonged with her. But this time, I didn't feel scared. I just told her no, and then she disappeared." I exchanged a glance with my wife, who looked just as surprised as I felt. "How did you feel when you woke up?" my wife asked carefully. Emily paused for a moment, then smiled softly. "Relieved, like I finally told her what I needed to say." I let out a slow breath, feeling something lift from my chest. My sister had spent years making Emily feel like she wasn't in control of her own life, but not anymore. The past was behind her now. She had chosen her family. She had chosen us. That night, as I tucked her in, she reached for my hand. "I don't think she's ever coming back, is she?" she asked. I brushed a stray hair from her forehead. "Maybe not. But even if she does, you know who you are now. And no one can ever take that from you." She smiled, squeezing my hand. "I love you, Dad." My heart swelled. "I love you too, sweetheart, always." And as I turned off the light, I realized this wasn't just the end of a battle. This was the start of something real. Emily was home for good. Being a parent isn't about biology, it's about showing up every single day. My sister thought she could claim Emily just because she gave birth to her. But real family is built on love, trust, and commitment. Now, let me ask you, have you ever had to fight for someone you loved? How did it change your relationship? Drop your stories in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you made it this far, don't forget to like and subscribe. See you in the next one.